recorded. I'm now going to click on record. It's Monday, the 29th of June, 2020, and we welcome you to a webinar with Charlotte, Ryland and Katrina Barnes, Creative Translation in the Classroom. I'm Helen Myers. I'm the chair of the London branch. All of these webinars are helped an awful lot by Heike Philp, who set us up and shown us how to do things. We're grateful to Linguiscope, who support what we do, and also to Joe Dale, who at some point will put in the chat, I think, about various things that he can offer at the moment to help you with your online teaching and learning. This is run by the ALL. Please now use this time to write in the chat if you're a member of ALL and encourage others to join, because you should join. We are the main association, or the only association which really represents language teachers, and it's ever so important, I think, that we have a voice, that we communicate with each other. And if you're not a member already, join today, become a member, and you can get 10% discount with this code, webinar10. And that offer does run until the 30th of September. So please do join us. It would be lovely to have you. Everything's run by volunteers. You know, that we meet each other at our language conferences. It's great to be a member. And I'm hoping people are writing that in the chat at the moment. You'll be able to see this recording on the ALL London website. We'll give a link there. And here we've got what's coming soon. Again, you can go onto the site and you can see that tomorrow we've got Rachel Smith talking about using Apple apps for blended learning. On Thursday, we've got Florence Lyons, who's coming along to do about collaborative writing. A webinar with Paul on Saturday. There's quite a lot going this week. And also we've got a summer social, which is coming up on Saturday, July the 11th. I've already mentioned this about our etiquette, that we really are always professional and kind. Nobody uses this as a platform to have a little beef about anything. We're happy to host speakers and participants free of charge. They're responsible for what they say. So these are the people you've come along to see. So here we've got Charlotte and Katrina. Charlotte runs two organisations. She'll probably be talking about that, I think, during the session as well. Katrina is a teacher with expertise of using translation. Both of them have spoken at our conferences and both have really inspired people, and that's the reason why we went up to them and said, please would you come along and do a webinar for us? And we're so grateful to you that you've accepted and you've agreed to do that. So you'll have already read this because you've signed up for this, but we're really looking forward to this. The pleasure of translation, and you can be guaranteed at the end of this you will see it as a pleasure and you'll want to communicate that to your students. So thanks so much again for offering to come along. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and pass over to you.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I did just want to start by saying thank you so much to Helen and everybody at ALL for inviting us to give this webinar. I've really enjoyed getting to know the work of ALL and of my local branch, the Oxfordshire branch, over the past few years. And I'm so impressed by everything that you do and what a great positive atmosphere you create around MFL, which is so important for all of us working in the field. And as Helen said, Katrina and I both presented at the Language World conference this March, just before lockdown. And we presented in different sessions, but on similar themes. And we hatched a plan then to do something jointly. We didn't think then that the joint thing we did would be a webinar in front of over 100 people. But we're really delighted to have the opportunity to do that. During lockdown, as you'll hear in this talk, we've been thinking in particular about ways of making creative translation more accessible virtually. And this is the first webinar on creative translation that Katrina and I have been involved in. So it's a really great start for that move to the virtual. You will hear two phrases quite a lot today, I think. One of them is creative translation and the other one is dynamic translation. We wanted you just to think, start off by thinking, and you can write it in the chat if you like, about what you think that is, whether you think you already use that in your teaching, and what you think the benefits might be of that. So while you're pondering that, I'll hand over to Katrina, who's going to talk through what's going to happen this evening.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Let's check this. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Yep, great. Okay, so nice to see everybody here today. Thank you so much for coming. I'm quite overwhelmed by what a lovely selection of people we have here. Oh, hold on. There we go. Okay, little bit of an outline for you today. So we're going to take you through some multilingual warm-ups, the kinds of things that we would usually use in our creative and dynamic translation sessions. Then we're going to give you a bit of a background, a bit of rationale as to where all this has come from and why you might want to use it, what the benefits are pedagogically to having it in your classrooms. Then it's going to be over to you. You're going to be our guinea pigs. You're going to give you a go at it yourself to see what your students could experience. And after that, we're going to talk a little bit more about other ways to bring creative and dynamic translation into your classrooms, lots of practical ideas for you to take back with you, and then hopefully some time for some questions at the end. So without further ado, let's crack on with a warm-up. So you might need the chat open for this one. Start a challenge for you. Got 5 different expressions here in 5 different languages. Can you, for your starter, have a look through and just think, do I recognize any of those languages? Just have a quick think. I'm going to give you about 3 seconds to see if you can identify any of them. And as soon as you've done that, I'm going to give you another maybe 7 seconds to see if you can match the ones on the left with the ones on the right. Please feel free to type any of your answers in the chat. Okay.
Looking good.
Looking good. Should we be getting the right answers? Okay. Excellent. Wow. So yeah, I can see the chat's going bonkers. That's fantastic. So I'm going to give over to Charlotte in a second to talk you through the answers, but just to keep you in suspense for a moment longer, I'm going to ask you one final question about these. Can you think of a way of changing these to help an English speaker understand them? We've got written English here, but you might say that these don't really make sense yet. How could you make sense out of them in English? How could you make an English speaker understand what they mean? Maybe a few more suggestions into the chat. Any ideas? If you're very familiar with some of these languages, you might have a head start. Okay. Right, Charlotte, over to you. Do you want to talk us through what we have just seen here?
Yes. Do you want to clip forward? So the first thing I should say is that I can't take credit for these slides. These were actually mostly created by undergraduates and postgraduates from Oxford and Norwich who've taken part in one of my projects, and they're the ones with the creative ideas and the ability to find sweet pictures on the internet. So this one was German, as I've seen lots of correct answers in the chat. It literally means you go to me onto the biscuit. I went very literal there with the grammar. And there's the biscuit, and the translation, the idiomatic translation of that is "you get on my nerves." Il en fait un fromage. I'm not going to read all of these out. It's French. He is making a cheese out of it, and I've seen a couple of people saying he's making a meal out of it. He's overreacting.
Nice.
And in the corner there's our overreacting person. Okay, this is where my linguistic pronunciation. Oops. Italian. To treat with a fish in the face. Thank you, Katrina.
There we go. I don't speak Italian. That was a very, very good guess, hopefully. Okay, and finally, oh no. Now, I have a very good Dutch friend who I have on very good authority. We say it like, de aap komt uit de mouw.
Thank you so much.
Someone can correct me, please, in the chat if that was not great.
This is one of my favourites, because I think you could do this with a class that didn't know Dutch and just show them the Dutch sentence and get them to tell you where the monkey is, and somebody will figure out monkey, ape, up, and make that connection. And that's a really great way of empowering a language learner, because you've shown them that without knowing anything, they can start to guess, they can make educated guesses and start to understand a new language. And the cat is out of the bag, and I think there's a cat there on the slide. There we go.
There they are.
And there's one more, is there? Yeah.
Okay.
So this is Mandarin.
There we go.
to cast a brick to attract jade. This is the hardest one to guess, I think. What it means is to toss an idea out there. I have to check the chat later and see if anybody got that right. You can sort of see how that idea develops.
I think this one is fascinating because jade is such a culturally significant reference to China. So that's a really great way of introducing students to this idea of tapping into a whole sort of new cultural significance through a translation, through language. Love that example. Great.
So the reason that we've started with that is to show you how when we do these translation workshops, which in my case are often run by professional translators or by university students, that we like to start by creating a multilingual space in the classroom, and which is about one of our aims being to show that all languages are welcome. It doesn't matter how good you are at a language. You can be a linguist even if you're not fluent. That's such an important message, I think, to get across to our learners. And there are various ways of doing this with these multilingual warm-ups. I like to do that idiom one because not only is it fun and a bit silly and accessible to all, but it's also a really good way of making what we call creative translation tangible. And what I mean by that is that the students see immediately that you cannot translate word for word successfully. It makes a nonsense. And that happens in particular with this idiomatic metaphorical language, of course. But in fact, we all know that it happens with any translation, and that whenever you're mediating between two languages, you always have to be creative. There always has to be that creative phase that comes after the word for word translation. Having said that, you still have to do that word for word translation. You have to do that decoding. You have to understand the text and understand how all the words fit together in order to be able to start this process of decoding and translating. So it's a really good lead in to the more complex translation work that we go on to do and that we're going to go on to do this evening. And so that brings up some of these key ideas that we have with creative translation. It's about decoding, but it's decoding with a purpose. They want to find out what this means and they want to be able to make it sound good in English. It's fun, and it lends itself really well to collaboration. Of course, you can get groups working on this and thinking about the best way to the best English idiom to translate it with. So those are just some of the key ideas that come to my mind when I think about creative translation. Katrina, do you want to say a little bit about dynamic translation?
Yeah, this is an interesting terminological difference that we've made here, just because I was looking for ages for a term to successfully describe what it is that I've been doing and what it is that I've been trying in this, within these activities. And I chose this idea of dynamic translation because it is a dynamic process. It's not something where you just go, as Charlotte said, you don't go from this one text and then it just becomes this text. There's a multitude of kind of mini processes going on between there, all of which are very creative, often collaborative, and really exciting. And mediating, again, is a key word that Charlotte used there. I think another thing that I think I want to echo with what Charlotte said is that the key difference between what we're talking about in this session and what you might already be doing with students in your classroom, because I mean we're all translating, all teachers use translation in class very often, and I absolutely recommend that you do. It's a fantastic technique to check a student's understanding or to check that they can produce the target language. Nothing wrong with that. The difference between that and what we're doing is purpose. So here we're giving the students a tangible purpose for translating because they're creating an authentic translation product that they can be proud of, that they can put their creative selves into, and they can not just use their linguistic skills, but use their humanistic skills, use their sense of what is good, what is going to suit one person and not another, using all of those metapragmatic skills as well. So putting that all together, dynamic translation for me, and my definition is at the bottom of the screen now, they are activities in which students become translators. They're not just studying translation, they're becoming active translators in simulations of real world communicative creative translation tasks, and that's what the name of the game is for today. So with that in mind, I'm going to blast through some rationale for you. I'm going to pass over back to Charlotte to kick us off with this.
Yeah, and I might just echo what you said about them becoming translators. Like, we've seen that in practice with our Stephen Spender Trust workshops, you know, with 9 and 10-year-olds who don't know what a translator is at the beginning of the session, and then come out kind of articulating. They feel like translators. It's again, I probably will use the word empowering a bit more this evening, but that, you know, that is what's happening, and it's giving them an identity as a linguist, even at that young age. Yeah, so these words are currently written on my fridge. Resilience, problem solving, creativity, grammar and vocabulary, on a like whiteboard on my fridge rather than directly onto my fridge. And the reason for that is that last week I happened to hear a short radio item about education and the broad skills that we should be teaching our young people. And the panel came up with the first 3 words here: resilience, problem solving and creativity. And I was absolutely delighted by this, because those are the 3 terms pretty much on the nose that we're constantly thinking about when we're thinking about creative translation. Katrina's going to go into a bit more detail about that. I just wanted to flag those because they seem so key to me. And I've then added grammar and vocabulary because in the specific MFL context, of course, it's very important that is there as well on some level. And as we'll show you later on, as well as being kind of enriching, inspiring, showing you all the range of skills and activities that you can do with the language. These activities also do help you to practice and consolidate grammar and to learn vocabulary. Over to you, Katrina.
So why bother? Hopefully, after you've gone through this process that we're going to be showing you in a minute, this will all become very, very obvious. But just to give you a really quick example, I'm not going to say them all individually because there is an extensive list of reasons. I'm still going. It's a really extensive list of reasons why this is a good option in MFL classes. Just some standout points for me that I think make this a really exciting thing to do. As I mentioned before, there is a purpose. We can see in the middle of the screen there is a purpose to what they're doing. They're not just sitting there in class saying, oh well, you know, I'm being talked at and I'm going to learn this language, and then what? You know, they're actually there to do something, and they can take ownership of that and be proud of it at the end. It's an extremely democratizing process. This process welcomes multilingual knowledge. Those students who have home languages that maybe don't feel there's a place for that in school, they can bring that language into the translation classroom, to share it with their peers, to make it something that they have specialist knowledge of. And that's extremely, I'm going to use the word again, empowering. It is. Also, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're working in a very monolingual context, students that don't have much exposure to another language, they are L1 experts, so they can bring that expertise to really give them more confidence and give them much more empowerment for in their modern foreign language classrooms. I think, I don't know, those of you who work in a monolingual context much more like mine will know that a lot of these students, language learning just doesn't mean much to them to begin with. This is a really nice bridge into that whole concept of even, you know, having contact with other languages. Other major benefits of this are the activation of students. As I said, they're not just sitting there, they're becoming mediators, they're reflecting the real world. That's really important to so many of my students that I speak to. They want to know that what they're learning is something that they're going to be able to actively do at some point. So it kind of mirrors this idea of the professional world. It promotes tolerance, ambiguity, all these ideas that there's no one right answer. It builds resilience, and in the same vein, in that they are used to by the time they get used to doing those translation activities, they're very used to seeing a text and saying, oh, would this work here? I don't know. Maybe if I were talking to a child, then this would work. But actually, I don't think that's right here. And being able to be okay with the fact that there's no one way of doing it, and persevering with that and really working with it and not just being given the answer, both builds tolerance and resilience. As well, at the bottom, drawing attention to what Charlotte said as well, there are a lot of metalinguistic awareness benefits. The idea that grammar and vocabulary are still a very key part of the translation process, but they're not being penalized if they don't know them. That's the thing. It's a guided discovery of those words without them feeling like they're being tested. As we'll see in some of the activities that we show you, we're very liberal with giving glossaries and giving help where it's needed. So this again can be very democratized, because you can scaffold it as much or as little as you need to. I'm not going to say any more about that, because I want us to crack on and give you a go of this yourselves. And this is where we find out whether the breakout room thing is going to work. So
Katrina, can I just jump in just to finish off about, just go back to resilience?
Oh, yes.
I think the other facet of that is, you know, the idea that when you're doing these activities, you're giving students a block of text that they will not understand the whole thing and they won't know all the words. Yeah. And we use resources to kind of make it accessible to them, like you said about glossaries. But that to me is such an important feature of the resilience, because it gives them the confidence to know that they can deal with a text like that, a text that is officially too difficult for their level.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Excellent. Right. So this is the text that you are going to be translating for us today in some groups. Some of you might recognize it. It's from Kif Kif Demain, which you will know, those of you who are A-level French teachers, often is one of the set texts for A-level. And it's also used in some of the GCSE preparation books for the literary translation there. So hopefully a little bit familiar to you. If not, and then there may be a lot of non-French teachers listening as well, we're hoping that the breakout rooms are going to fall in such a way that there is at least one French speaker in each group. But if not, we will just be proving the point that it can be used for complete beginners, because you've got a full glossary there to help you. Charlotte, is the handout in the chat? We are about to send you a link to the handout for this session, which ordinarily students would have given to them in the class. You are going to, in groups, be given a section of each of this text to translate. It will be more, it may be one sentence or two within your groups. And as we stressed before, it doesn't have to be a polished version. What we're looking for is for you to figure out what is going on here and how should we translate it so that it's a good translation product. So in order to do that, you're going to have to ask yourself some really, really key questions here. You need to know about this text. You need to make some decisions about this text, about what it's for, who it was written by, when and where was it written, what's the context behind it. Are you going to be honoring that? Are you going to be faithful to that? And then you're also going to balance that with the idea of your target audience now. Who is going to be reading it? What was the point of translating it? And we are going to give you a lot of clues as to who is going to be reading it and why it's being translated. But these are questions that when you get into your breakout rooms, I would like you to discuss with the people in your group. And this screen here is also on the handout for you to refer to. So all of these decisions will lead you to how are you going to translate it. This means that someone who is translating this for a younger audience might choose very different words to somebody who is translating for, an older literary audience. So these are all the kinds of decisions that you are going to be making now as translators. So here is your brief. This, when I was a translator a couple of years ago, this is the kind of thing that I would find in my inbox very frequently. Unfortunately, a lot of the jobs weren't quite as interesting as this, but this is the same sort of idea. So your brief is translators. You will be translating for a literary magazine which publishes excerpts of international adult fiction in the UK. That should be sounding off lots of bells in your head. You should be thinking, right, what does that mean? I'm going to translate this text like, who am I addressing it to? What's going to be suitable for that kind of audience? Secondly, we need to know that the author is a well-known French author of young adult fiction. And be careful, because this author is very, very, very touchy, and she's extremely cautious about having the translation published, and will only give copyright approval if she is convinced that this translator has been faithful to her initial ideas. So no pressure or anything. With these instructions in mind, we are going to send you off in your groups now. So, sorry, before you go, I just want to say we should have 10 groups. Is that right?
Well, how many do you want in a group? Because I've worked out if you have 23 groups, there'll be 6 in a group.
23. Can we do 20 groups?
20 groups, yes.
Is that right? So if we
Yes.
do, if you find yourself in breakout room 1, 2, 3, or 4, then can you please translate the first segment that's on your handout? If you are in 5, 6, 7, or 8, then can you translate section 2 in your handout? 9, 10, 11, 12 will be section 3. 13, 14, 15, 16 will be section 4. And 17, 18, 19, 20, you will be translating section 5. If you get there and you've no idea what you're translating, hopefully there's enough people in your group to figure it out.
And it doesn't matter if you get the
and it doesn't
wrong
really
one,
matter anyway. We'll just have a good shout. We'll have a good chat about it after.
We can send a message to you. Now, this is the time for resilience and patience.
Indeed.
This is only the second time that we've done this. So probably if you unshare your screen, that would be good. So I'm about to click on breakout rooms. So, and I'm going to put you to 20 rooms. 20 rooms. It's going to be automatic. There'll be 6 to 7 participants per room. If you get stuck, don't worry. We'll look after you here. All right.
Helen, can I just say, will they be able to still access the chat after they're in the breakout room?
Not only their private chat. No.
So could you please click on the link before we go into the breakout room so that you definitely have the handout in front of you?
And the other thing, I think we want it to be 7 minutes long, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you set it for 7 minutes?
Helen. Right. Okay. Well, I'll call you back after 6 minutes.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. So I'm about to send you, and don't worry, we'll send you a little message with the link. We can do that as well.
Good luck, translators. Looking forward to seeing what you can do.
Oh, isn't Simon helpful?
Simon.
You're wonderful.
Simon, you're a star.
Thank you. Here goes. So I am opening all rooms. So please accept it. Oh, that's. Oh dear, the presenters have gone too. I'm so relieved to see people come back. I worry that I might have thrown you out into the ether. Welcome back. Welcome back, Chris. Frank, welcome back. And Mart. Welcome back, Fatima.
We are done, Helen. We've done our translation, and
you've done it, have you? Yes, well, with you there, you got a flying start there.
Oh, thank you. Oh, we were all working so greatly.
It's lovely to see everybody's faces.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah. That was a lovely discussion. I got whisked away into a breakout room, and it was.
I thought, yes, I forget. I just did it without leaving.
No, it was lovely. It was great.
Yeah, the time before I did this with Kerry, she got flung out as well. But you would have always had the option to come back, I think, would you? Was there always a...
I think so. I didn't investigate that because I ended up having a lovely conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
Because I just had a little break. I was just here almost thinking, it's all been recorded with me suddenly going,
You get asked to leave. So we had a choice to leave the room of that. So we left, and we end up seeing the lovely Helen.
Right, well, I think everyone's back now, I think. So
great. Can everybody see my screen again?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So this is what you had. Usually when we're in class, I'm quite conscious of time at the moment, but usually when we're in class, we would definitely do some kind of warming up of the class to this text. So I would talk, give them a summary, maybe, depending on the level, get them to summarize what the key, very, very key topic is, or what's going on. One of these very kind of look for gist kind of questions. So just to fill that in for you, we might do a bit of sort of sound work, language work as well, depending on the level there. So in essence, this is now a very famous young adult novel, I suppose, and it is about a young girl who lives in France, and this bit is particularly about a visit to her aunt. So she and her mother are going to see her aunt, who you've probably discovered from whichever segment you were translating. She's Algerian, and it's giving us a little bit of background about this aunt and the kind of person that she is, and some history to her. So let's have a look. I would love to hear if you could pop in the chat. Could you, if you were in groups 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you had section 1, could you please pop in the chat one thing that you maybe struggled with, or one thing that a kind of a debate arose around in your section? Which bit did you find particularly problematic or interesting, depending on how you look at it, or something that caused some kind of difference of view or anything like that? Just one comment, that would be great. Let me have a look. What's on with couscous? Yes, Lucky Charm Baby. We really struggled with that too. Great. Yeah, spent some time on couscous and felt it was emphatic, so arrived at her signature couscous. I like that. That's fantastic. Yeah. Public Works. Yeah, I also struggle with this, which we'll have a look at in mine at the minute. Vraie femme. Yeah. My mum and I, or mum and me, which works better. This is really lovely. Excellent. Some really nice considerations. And in my group, I hope maybe you were having similar conversations, but we were really trying to bear in mind this idea that this is young adult fiction and this is being written for that audience. So saying something to do, even using the word maman, how do we deal with that? Do we say mum? Do we say mother? Do we say mummy? I don't know. It depends on who you think you're translating for and who the speaker is. Who is this voice that's coming through? And that would require you to, arguably know a bit more about the text, which we would give you usually before the session. No debate, but the realization that in English we wouldn't say Aunt Zara, but okay, but Aunt Zara has, okay. Yeah. So this idea, this is a cultural difference as well, those cultural considerations. How do you square that? Do you allow it to still be as it was in the source language? And in that way, you're probably being more loyal to the writer, but is an English-speaking audience going to be alienated by that? Are they going to think, oh, I'm not sure this sounds right because that's not how I would say it. So it's making this constant compromise between what should have been there originally in the French and what an English audience is what's going to speak to them. Auntie, yeah, so we've got loads of options for that as well. Aunt versus auntie, great. Yeah, Public Works. I've got a kind of a selection from all sections here, so that's fantastic. If you have any more that you want to contribute, please crack on, put them in there now. Yes, we've got Aunt Zora, sounds okay to me. I tend to agree, Lauren. I think that for me it doesn't sound particularly odd, but I think it sounds stiffer possibly than I think. But that depends on the relationship, doesn't it? Like, is this a stiff relationship that she has with that aunt? We don't know yet. So we're constantly evaluating the humanity of this text. That's extremely important here. Yes, this idea of putting that pronoun in there, which is a very kind of a tendency of French, isn't it? So it might jar. Sarah says, yeah. We might just kind of lead straight on into the text. Let's have a look. Do please keep putting your comments in and having that discussion while I'm discussing some of the points that came up for me. So this is my translation, my stab at this. And as I keep saying, and I continue to say to all my students as well, there is really no best fit here. There are always creative decisions, personal decisions to be made. So these are some of mine. I went for mum. And I were invited to Aunt Zora's place for couscous. This idea of she in French, which French speakers will know, it can be very problematic. Does that mean at someone's place, just around theirs, or with them? Which in the second line, I decided to go with her rather than at her house, because I decided it was already too obvious that we were at her house because we said we were going to go over there. So these are the kind of contextual factors that we're going to bring in. This idea of nominalizing this to West Algeria rather than saying she is West Algerian, I'm not really sure why I chose that. It just sounded better, I think, for me. And here, this bit in the middle, a lot of us I've seen in the chat coming up here, this idea of being a child who symbolized freedom, or a child symbol of freedom, or a symbol of freedom who was a child. It went around so many ways and none of them quite sounded right. And someone in the group that I was speaking to had a lovely suggestion of the poster child for freedom, which I thought was great. I would never have thought of that. But it, again, thinking about the fact that this is young adult fiction, that type of phrase is something that that audience might particularly find that resonates, you know. So really lovely suggestion there. And again, same thing with Lucky Charm Baby. I wasn't quite happy with that even when I put it there. This idea of je l'aime in French, this, can I say I like her, I love her? What does that actually mean? Does it mean that I love her in this sentence? Does it not? We don't know yet. So we need to decide, we need to learn more about this relationship in order to be able to translate. And that really proves how human this process is. You can't just say this word equals this word. It depends upon feeling, upon relationship, upon all these other decisions. Very quickly at the end here, this idea of public works, I agree, was very problematic and it's very ambiguous. We don't really know what that means. And this idea of taking a second wife back in Algeria and spends rather than she stays 6 months. I think spends was a better way of doing that. And then là-bas au pays in French, they're in the country. What, you know, it doesn't sound right. We need to find a way of making that quite clear that that's Algeria in English. To me, as my English speaking instinct is to say that. So I hope that was an interesting experience. There are so many ways that this can be exploited to different extents in different ways. All over, you know, throughout different activities within MFL. We're going to spend just a little bit of time now introducing you to some of the ways in which you could, I mean, you could replicate an activity exactly like what we've just done here and get some of those conversations going. However, if you wanted something that was a bit more quick fire, or something which, you know, which is slightly different age groups, which is, you know, there are so many ways in which this concept can be used, and we're going to take you through a few of those now. So, I'm just going to try and move that on. Oops. Yeah, here we go. So Charlotte, I'm going to pass over to you. Charlotte's going to tell us a bit about some of the ways in which this has been translated, pun no intended, no pun intended. Gosh, all of this moving words around is just frying my brain in a very good way. Anyway, yeah, Charlotte's going to tell us a bit about how this concept has been used by the Stephen Spender Trust and other organisations as well.
Great, thank you so much, Katrina. So yeah, I'm going to sort of pan back a little bit and talk about where I've come from, how I've come to this work, and what work I'm doing with it now. So you can see the Stephen Spender Trust there, which is the charity that I run and have done for the past 2 years, although the charity is over 20 years old. And Translators in Schools is the main education programme of the Stephen Spender Trust. You may know the trust, you may not know the trust at all, in which case, welcome. But you may know it because of the Stephen Spender Prize, which is, I'll talk about in a minute, or through Translators in Schools programme. Can you go on, Katrina? Yeah, so one of the great things about the text that Katrina chose for our breakout session is that it was translated for publication by the translator Sarah Arditsoni, who was the co-founder of Translators in Schools. If you go on to the next slide. So this is my opportunity, my sort of homage opportunity to introduce you to the 3 people who co-founded Translators in Schools. There's Sam Holmes, Robina Pellenburn, who's my predecessor at the Trust, and Sarah Arditsoni, and it's their brainchild to develop this professional development programme that trains translators to go into schools, and that's a programme that we're really developing at the moment, and developing it in particular to create resources that you can all use in your classrooms. If you go on. So I also, a couple of years ago, established a project at Oxford University called the Translation Exchange, which is partly inspired by the Stephen Spender Trust and does similar activities, but mostly using university students, working with university students to go into schools. and run translation workshops. You can just flick through this, Katrina. These are just some of the things we're doing. The Stephen Spender Prize is open at the moment for the next 2 and a bit weeks. There's some information about it. The idea is that you translate any poem out of any language and you write a short text about your translation choices. It's open to adults, so you can all get involved, but it's also, and we're really focusing at the moment on the youth categories. If you go forward, Katrina. With my Oxford, no, sorry, go back. With my Oxford project, we're also setting up a competition which is very, very MFL focused. And we've got a kind of mini the competition is going to launch next year, but we've got a kind of mini version of that competition running at the moment with a deadline of the 31st of July. There's the URL to find out about that. It's only French and German at the moment, although we also have a book club, which is a virtual book club, which is looking at a book translated from Spanish. So we're covering the main three and hoping to build from there. I also wanted to point out multilingual creativity, which is the new resources hub of the Stephen Spender Trust. So as I said, we've been working, especially before, but especially during lockdown, to think about how we can make this creative translation work more accessible to more young people and to more teachers. And our main thinking there was that especially when people are stuck at home on their own, they need ideas for what to translate, and then they need guidelines for how to go about translating it, and to show them what a rich activity translation can be. And so if you go to the resources page of our website, you'll find suggested poems for the Stephen Spender Prize, and these are booklets in various languages. If you go forward. And also, can you just go back to, sorry. Yeah, worksheets and PowerPoints that you can use, but that your students can also access directly, that take them through the process of translation. And finally, next slide. Just go back one. There we go.
It's a terrible still of me, isn't it?
We've created what we're calling what we've called translation casts, which is translators and teachers talking through their translation of a poem as a way of kind of encouraging young people to do it themselves, and also showing them some tips and tricks for how to translate. And Katrina was one of the first people to make these for us, so of course I've picked that one as our slide, and that leads on very nicely, Katrina, to you. Talking about some more ideas.
Great. So as I said, you could very easily set up a kind of activity that we just ran through with you there, just picking any text that that students might be coming across, or something that will interest them, and then getting them to argue through these translations, engaging with how those sentences are put together, and how they flow as in terms of a polished text at the other end as well. Some other things that you might want to look at are comparing and critiquing existing translations. I did this for several workshops using Japanese in the last year or two, using haiku. So this is a very famous haiku by Basho, and these are two published translations of the same text. The idea here would be to constantly refer back to that source text to see which one has been the most loyal, which one has made the best decisions, which one's decisions do you think were uncalled for, really starting a debate going there, always referring back to the source language there. Similarly, you might recognize this line. This is the very famous first line from L'Étranger, in which translators have fought duels, I'm fairly sure that is not an exaggeration, about how this should be translated. And they're depending on the translator, depending on their creative process, there are diverse ways that this first line can be understood. So by going through that translation process, your students are really engaging with that language, and it's not just some words on a page to them. It's a creative process, and it's a meaning-making exercise all by itself. So some examples for you to maybe discuss there. Mistranslations are a favorite in all my classes. Can you identify what's gone wrong here, and can you correct it? In this example, I have something like this. Got a bit of Google Translate bashing is always something I try and get into a lesson, and I very much recommend it because the students love it as well, and hopefully it dissuades them from keeping sending me written work that's been Google translated as well, because I show them how ridiculous it is. So this is the kind of thing that you might do with that. So put in an idiom, some of the ones that Charlotte was showing us at the beginning, for example, and just illustrate the point that that won't work here, and just, you know, get them suggesting better translations as well. Running translations, you might have heard of running dictations. You might do them in your classes. In this one, I add a translator to the process. So in groups, someone runs out and runs back in, has to dictate the text in the target language to by the target language, I mean in the foreign language, and then the scribe notes it down, and then the translator translates it into English, or could be the other way around if you want to do it into the target language as well. And you get awarded for both accuracy and for making good translators' decisions, purposeful decisions in this process. And my students really love this one. So this is one that I used with a text about Stromae. Changing the audience, how does the audience change what you translate it as? So in French, all these myriad differences, different versions of how you could translate what are you doing here, depending on audience and purpose, possibly. Storybook translations, I've done these with year 6 and year 7 particularly, and this is very much based on the Stephen Spender Translators in Schools model, which I did that course a few years ago and got the ideas from that. So getting them to basically reimagine a storybook, going through that process of arguing how to do it best in their groups, and they come out with these beautiful new reimaginings of that story in English. And they go through a carousel editing process to do that. So they critique the translations and then move it on. I just love this because someone's put a really thoughtful proofreader comment there, and then the group that got it back has just written noted. So I think they were a little bit cross about having been so edited, but yeah, it's a really great way of getting them talking about language and getting really defensive about their own translation. It's wonderful. I'm going to get Charlotte to talk about these because these are more examples from other translators and teachers.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to say I'm aware this is quite whistle stop. We will be sharing the PowerPoint, and in some way this last section is so that all of these resources are there in the PowerPoint for you to look at afterwards, and there are various links as well. So I've just got two final things I wanted to point to. First of all is graphic novels are really great for this kind of work, and this also kind of circles back to how I started by saying, you know, we've got resilience and creativity, but we've also got grammar and vocab. And there was a great project a couple of years ago where a translator and a teacher, and I think the teacher is here somewhere. Hello, Anne. I saw you in the chat earlier on. Co-developed a workshop using the Argentine comic Mafalda, and they made sure that there were all sorts of GCSE links to do with illness, I think, and going to the doctors, and if you click on the link there, you can read about that on our website. And then similarly, this is me as a Germanist. Shout out to all the Germanisten out there. This is a Bertolt Brecht poem that I really like using with classes because it's short and it's very full of meaning, and this is just to show you that you can do a workshop that looks at a poem and talks about the meaning of the poem and all of those sorts of ideas, but at the same time also, if you look down in your bottom right corner rather, you've got what I'm calling their language spin-offs, as in homing in on particular linguistic, grammatical things that happen in the poem. You can sort of spin out, do some exercises on that, and then come back into the poem. And what I really like about that is that it makes it a whole kind of coherent exercise, which has the ultimate purpose of creating an English translation, but you've managed to insinuate some really nice German grammar into there as well. And I think the very final slide is just, again, this is all on our website. Just an example of extension activities that you can do with poetry or prose. So this is going back to the creativity, that there's all sorts of opportunities for differentiation here, where you can develop different creative writing activities that come out of the translation of a poem, but then lead off into all sorts of creative and inspiring exercises.
Great. So we just want to say thank you so much, and we're just about 1 minute over, but I think, Charlotte, if you're happy, we can stay another 5 and take any questions. We just want to leave you with the concluding thought, really, that translation, I think, really needs rebranding in a way that this is a reimagining of what translation could do in your classrooms. It's not just whereas that is good to kind of get things in and out of language in order to test, in order to check, but this is bringing it into the real world. This is making it meaningful, making it human, making it exciting, and making language learning be part of what I always think it was supposed to be part of, which is about meaning and communication between people, and ultimately being more human. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll be really happy to take any questions if you want to type them in the chat.
Thank you from me too. It's such a pleasure to be able to do this. And Katrina, I loved the number of times you used the word human in that.
Oh gosh, I was trying hard not to do empowered.
No.
So I did human instead.
I do empower, you do human. No,
okay,
I think that's great. I think that's such a such a great way of thinking about it.
I'm sure there may well be people with questions, but can I just say, as people are pouring their thanks out to you, I just want to add on, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for such an inspiring session. I think it was we were obviously going to really enjoy it. We're language teachers. We love language.
Yeah, it's a bit preaching to the choir, isn't it?
It's an intrinsic thing, but I think it's so important, isn't it, that we don't lose that, and that we realise that it is something that is special and we enjoy it. And your enthusiasm and the way that we can then enthuse others, that can be infectious. You've infected us tonight, definitely. With absolutely
mission accomplished.
And it is something which, we say with the Association for Language Learning, it's an umbrella for everybody. There are different people who have different ideas about what works, what doesn't work. But this is something that you can see is working. It's working for you. It's working for your students. And it's lovely that you're giving us resources and ideas that really we can start using straight away, can't we?
Absolutely. So the PowerPoint is, we'll share it with you. And also there are some really useful links on the bottom of the handout that we sent you for the breakout. So do check those out as well.
So what I will do is, as soon as I've stopped this, I'll get the video available and I'll go to the web page and put everything there. So it should be available, and then I'll send everybody an email about that. So look at these lovely comments.
Yes, I'm being blown away. This is absolutely lovely.
There's a final slide, Katrina, that with the links on if you want to click forward.
Oh, is there? Hold on. I'm still sharing it.
And if there are any questions, I mean, do feel free anybody to open up. Oh, right. Do you want to talk us about the slides?
No. This is just
there for. I think it's on the handout anyway, isn't it?
It's on the handout,
right?
And then it's on the PowerPoint that we will share. I mean, I can share the PowerPoint now in the chat if that's okay.
And you can, yes. I don't know how big, whether there's a limit on the file that you can share on this, but yes. But I will certainly put it on the website, so that's fine.
Excellent.
And questions that people put during it, I noticed that you were watching the chat, and I think you have been answering a lot of the questions about which languages are available, that sort of thing.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, if there are any, if we didn't answer any as you went along, please do put them.
We are. We've got a question up here I've just seen. Do you think that Indigenous and Aboriginal languages are much more difficult to translate? That's a really interesting question. So I am not an expert I'm not sure which Aboriginal languages you might mean, but I think that any language is going to be challenging, depending on the starting point of how far your language is from that language. So I think there may be certain. I think it also comes down to how far apart those cultures are as well, whether there's combined cultural knowledge between those two societies. So I think it depends on many factors, and all of those factors that we looked at as well in the session. Who are you translating it for? How does that work if you're translating for someone who is in a much more, where it's going to be published somewhere so much more formally than where it was originally written, or all of those issues still come up no matter which text it is or which languages, I would say. Charlotte, I don't know if you want to add anything to that question.
I think the person has also, Jessica has also said that communities where there's a strong relationship with nature. I mean, I think it applies to all languages and all translation, in that it's partly about context and about implicit knowledge and sort of shared knowledge. And as a translator, you have to ask yourself, what do I need to know in order to understand this, and what do I need to be able to convey to my audience, and how do I do that? And then you open up all sort of questions around footnotes and things like that if you want to. But I think as the context is more, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess, yeah, where you have languages spoken by smaller communities, then the context may be harder to access for the translator, and so you may have to do a bit more work in order to get to those kind of core meanings and to that implicit knowledge, which you and then need to think about how you can convey it.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a couple more coming up here. So Simone says, would you do written translation before going into interpreting with the class, or the other way around? Not sure which scaffolds the other. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm currently finishing a project about interpreting, taking some of our principles into spoken translation at the moment, which is yeah, very similar and very different at the same time. But I suppose, I think my answer to that is I think it would depend on what your objective was with that class. There are different skills required. I suggest actually that written translation as a generalization would be more accessible to any level, to beginners. But then again, I can think of, even saying that, I can think of ways in which I would bring interpreting in to beginner level students. So I think I think in the majority of cases, I think that written translation in this context, in the UK context, in the kinds of secondary school classrooms that we're working in anyway, I would suggest that probably written translation would precede interpreting, just because I think our students are much more kind of written word based in this particular country, but that might depend on your context. And then, yeah, when you get into interpreting, there's all sorts of other potential creative possibilities there, which, that's another webinar, right, Han?
We do. Someone has said an hour was not enough. She wanted a day.
Oh, yes. Give us a day. That'd be great.
No. Send me an email.
Then Hazel says, how long would that's for next week. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, I can take that one.
Yeah, go for it.
So how long would you usually spend on a translation task with your students? This came up. We had a session last week with, or several sessions, but with teachers and translators discussing a project we've been doing this year, where translators have gone into schools to run translation workshops. And one of the things that came out of it was that the teachers wanted it to be extended over several sessions. And they felt that it would be that the impact would be even greater if you did one session where you just got up to the decoding part, so you just got up to the kind of nuts and bolts understanding what's going on in the text, and then you set it aside, and then the next day or the next week or whatever you come back to it, and then you do a bit of recap, and then you move more into the kind of polishing and the creative aspect, and so I think it's not something to be rushed, I would say, and that that's usually where we find it doesn't work so well, if we're trying to cram too much in many ways, like we did. Katrina.
Luckily, you're also receptive and very hot on it. So
yeah. I think I really like that idea that came up last week about extending it and turning it into more of a project, and that's something that we're thinking about now. If we do it in a one session, then we usually say an absolute minimum of 45 minutes to do something substantial, and more like an hour and a half works really well. That's if a translator is coming in to present something and work with the pupils.
Yeah, I've had some really nice sessions where I've thankfully had the freedom, which is, I know, kind of on a premium in a lot of our cases, but when I was doing some year 6 work with our feeder schools last year, I had this freedom to use several sessions consecutively, where we basically hadn't decided on what the content was going to be there yet. So I was able to take, I think we did it in 3 separate sessions. So we had a planning stage, then a development and finalization stage, and then we had a performance stage at the end. And they love, particularly the younger kids, the idea of performing their translation. They had kind of people translating for each other in real time and kind of telling the story to a different class, that was an extremely powerful thing, that they felt that, you know, to even more emphasize this idea that they are the communicators and it was their language and they'd created that and they were using that to tell someone else a story that wouldn't have understood it otherwise. And that, you know, to have time to do that, I mean, it was a gift really. But if you can find any time like that to be able to do it, and it was definitely special. So yeah, as long as you can, basically. But that said, some of the activities I showed you, they can be quick fire translation-esque stuff, which involves the creative process, but they are, you know, they can be 10 minutes long, or, you know, they can be quick discussions, which then lead you into maybe looking at it in a different, looking at text in a different way. So also flexible, I would say. Yeah,
it's a project that we're just starting with the Stephen Spender Trust. Is developing resources that can be kind of slotted in to different moments of the language teaching classroom. It's currently unimaginatively called the Mini Activities Project. We'll have to think of something better than that, but that's the idea that this can be a mini activity that's slotted in. It doesn't have to be a whole day, although it's great if it is. So watch this space for those resources.
Great. Okay, yeah, I don't know if I missed any other questions. Let's see.
If you wouldn't mind unsharing your screen, what I normally do is say people could then open up their videos and we could have a nice selfie of us all.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
All right. And I don't know whether, Jonathan, you're there to open up your video and audio, because you made some lovely comments there.
I can see some familiar faces there. Hello.
I do like this Star Trek Next Generation.
Well, yeah, that was what I was thinking. I don't know about it, and I thought Jonathan was about to tell us about this. And he also wrote.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a famous episode. It's just that the crew, the alien race they encounter, speak purely in metaphor. Obviously, it's in English, but the crew have no idea what they're talking about, and they have to interpret all the cultural references.
Amazing.
The race have, their history and their background, and it makes for a great episode if you're a translator, I think.
That sounds fantastic. I need to look that up immediately.
And I loved what you wrote earlier in the chat, Jonathan. So not just an academic exercise, real room for creativity. I say it again, and would you like to say it again, Jonathan?
Languages are just such great fun.
Hooray.
They are. I'm about to take a picture of people who are showing them, and I can see, oh, Fatima, you're there. Hello, Danielle's there. Here goes. Danielle, you look as if you're in a wood somewhere. Lovely. So after 3, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And it's lovely to see your faces and your names. I know that some people obviously had to go a little bit earlier, but there we are. And I'm on to page 2 now. Jonathan, you're top left on page 2. Smile. 1, 2, 3. Great. That's lovely. And Mark, you're there as well, and Camille, and that's lovely. So I will add that to the web page. We'll have a class photo. We'll have a link to the video. We'll have a link to your PowerPoint, and that'd be really good. Okay. And we've got there Helen saying Game of Thrones too.
Oh yes, get some Dothraki translation going. There's a particular little clique in one of my classes that I think I need to exploit that with, because yeah, that could be the hook.
a film, I'm trying to remember the name, where some aliens come down and they communicate by ink through sort of spreading ink through liquid.
Arrival.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's also translation.
Excellent. Yeah, there's boundless ways of using this, and I think just using Realia a lot, just using adverts, using Google Translate, using everything that's around you, every kind of artifact that might be something that students will react to or come across. You know, everything has translation potential, and even we should say, we didn't mention before, but even intralingual translation, talking about within a language, you know, translating from one type of language to another. Something that has been really effective for me as well. And the other thing I was going to mention was EAL as well. At the moment, I've hopefully am about to start working with some Iranian students who have just arrived, who have no English whatsoever, but we're going to be doing some creative translation with them to get them to create some, some Farsi based stuff, but using English in order to understand that, in order to really kind of own it, then they're going to be translating it into Farsi for me and for future Farsi speakers of the school. So it's going to be something available to them. So a product that they can be proud of and that will be actually used. And what better welcome to the UK than that?
I love it. Well, I really love your ideas, and also this, because I've been around for so long. We've gone through all trends and target language and non-target, all this sort of business. And I just think the freedom to just talk, to say, well, translation is important. And it's, as you say, it's fun, and to discuss language. Very often now I'll say to people, it's like you do in English.
And what is this splitting off of those things? I find it perplexing, honestly, that there's so much disconnect between we have the English department and the MFL department. It's like, it's all language, isn't it? It's all communication. So there's a lot more synergies to be made there than currently are, which I appreciate is difficult. Is school days and everything's everyone's having a whip crack behind them, and we're trying to get things done. But if we can find some room to make these collaborations, that's what it's all about, I think.
Yes, and it has such a spin-off, doesn't it? Because people, students really enjoy translation, I find. Sometimes that's what they love to do.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean? What does every word actually mean?
Yeah. Some of them that you wouldn't think it of as well. Some of them get really, some of the really disengaged ones sometimes, and then they start coming up with these very kind of powerful defenses of their particular word choices, and you think, gosh, where did that come from? So it's
I noticed it there. You really started that off, and that was a really good idea to have. I know that I wasn't in on the activity, but I was when you were doing it at Language World, and just to experience again that enjoyment of discussing language. And your idea, there isn't a right answer. There's nobody sat down and said, oh, that word's going to be that word, and the discussion was carrying on while you were talking.
Yeah, that's great. And then the idea of them bringing that into other aspects of their life as well. I think this idea that we're teachers in a broader sense, that we're teaching tolerance, we're teaching, acceptance of difference and all these things. And I think for me, language learning should be at the heart of that. That's the whole point, right? So to make that more explicit and to actively give them those tools and that kind of knowledge, I think hopefully that's something that we can be doing more of.
And I'm reading these intriguing comments. Sarah, are you there? Can you open your mic and tell us about cornflake packets, please?
Oh, hello.
Where are you?
Cornflake packets are great.
At some point we must have been saying something, and I don't know how that came into it, but if you're still there.
Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
Oh.
Yeah, basically it was the idea of using anything and everything, and it goes back to my EAL days, my EFL days, where it was a question of using absolutely everything and all the authentic things to make them realize how much language is around and how much they can learn, I don't know, from the shampoo bottle just in the shower type thing. But the language is everywhere, and it's great fun, and there's so much to discuss. It was just, and often actually there's a lot of very good colloquial language on things like cornflake packets.
Yes, slogans and taglines and those kinds of things.
Done between EAL and EFL. I've recycled a lot of my EFL materials the other way round since I've been in Roots into Languages. You can, there's a lot of collaboration that could and should be done.
Definitely.
I can remember in the old days using lots of, and it goes in waves, doesn't it? Because I suppose in a way I can get a bit lazy because I think, well, it's on the internet anyway, but there's nothing like having an actual object. And as you say, to have the instructions for using the shampoo in various languages and working out, well, which word And it's quite important to know how much shampoo to use, I expect.
Do you know, when I lived in Japan, I did this, I spent time, lots and lots and lots of time looking up all of these individual, you know, instructions on the backs of bottles, because I mean, I really, really didn't know whether it was shampoo or whether it was hair, you know, whether it was soap or what it was. And I found one of these kind of these Google scan apps where you can kind of get the ideas and the potential for translation of that. Some of the translations were hilarious, particularly with Japanese. It was something about, my favorite one was on a shampoo bottle, it said, don't touch the hair or you will reach the hairy hair. Or it was just, and I was just crying with laughter, and I thought, this is brilliant, you know, language corruption at work. I love it. It's just so wonderful. And then went in and you know, told my students about it and set them a task to be, you know, translating this properly for an English user of the shampoo, you know. So it's everywhere if you use it, if you know how to use it, definitely.
Yeah, Danielle Bordet in the chat has pointed out using translation mishaps is great fun. That's that idea, isn't
Indeed,
it? That's another multilingual warmer that we often do, you know, to kind of loosen everybody up and get everybody thinking about what translation is and why it's important and why you can't just do it in that kind of mechanical word for word way. That will always send you down blind alleys, and you have to use context, you have to think about your audience, but at the same time that it always gets a laugh because you can choose the
and Danielle, would you like to open your mic, because you're saying these things and you're sitting there in your wood with your mic on. Be lovely if you opened it. Are you going to open your mic and speak to us? Because Danielle has done a webinar as well for us in the past. I think she's looking to see if she can find her mic.
She's saying, oh, go on.
And has done the Translators in Schools training, it sounds like.
Oh, so I see,
yeah.
Danielle's great on anything to do with authentic, using authentic. She's your woman. Really good.
Sorry, I was just being called for dinner. No, it's just that I've done the TIS training. I did the workshop with Sarah and Sam quite a few years ago now. And some of the stuff because I'm not in school, I'm not a teacher in school, I was fascinated by some of the reactions from the kids. So I presented this French book, and you know, all what you were saying about the discussion about how to translate and stuff. And what I was just saying was how some of the kids discovered that other children, their friends, they had never discussed the languages that they spoke at home. And some of them were discovering, you can speak whatever it was, you know, Swahili, or you can speak, I mean, it was East London. And that was really, I mean, it was brilliant, because in another context, they probably have said, you know, you speak that language. But all of a sudden, because that was brought in as a resource, as an asset, it was making them proud of speaking those languages, which probably they had never been given that chance before. Or, you know, the fact that they realized that they were speaking all those languages showed us that they hadn't really discussed that before. That's one of the main things that I found amazing when I did the workshop. What I didn't find amazing was that when I went to schools after that to propose that workshop, having prepared my book and all the material, nobody wanted to pay for it. And obviously there's only so much that you can do for free. But I didn't manage to convince my local schools of the value of that at the time. So
yeah, and that's the situation that I inherited a couple of years ago when I started working for the Trust, and it's something we're working on, partly getting funding so that the translators are funded to go into the schools, but partly about researching and gathering evidence for why this is so valuable, and why, you know, it's not just a kind of nice add-on to have, but that it's absolutely intrinsic.
But I think
to the experience of learning
if we were
languages.
doing the stages, I think there would be more time to exploit that in a way that maybe the teachers would find, you know, less fuzzy-wuzzy, and, you know, much more in keeping with what they have to deliver, because we're coming on top of everything else, which was not seen as being an integral part of it. I think that was one of the problems. You know, the reactions I got was, when would I have the time to do this?
Yeah.
And I was trying to convince them that actually all these discussions that would go around translating this text would help with, you know, delivering the curriculum, but it didn't register at the time. And also because when I did it, it was so rushed, you know, to actually take them through all those stages of, you know, discovering, and then you were supposed to present the text without the book without the text. So by the time they had looked at the pictures and, you know, made up, came up with ideas of what it could be, what is happening. I mean, by the time you had done that, there was very little time to then look at language itself and what they had learned from the actual language content. And I think that's why it was a little bit frustrating.
I think, I definitely share that experience of kind of being rushed through it and kind of it being kind of wedged into the last day at the end of July or that kind of thing, when, you know, everyone's brain had gone out the window already and all that kind of thing. What I would say is that I can't say too much, but I do think that there is a change in the tide happening, and I think that this will increasingly have a place as a packaging possibly for other pedagogical goals, and I think I'm quite confident that those kind of their flexibility, there is new flexibility there to incorporate the kind of creative process that we're proposing, because people are actually beginning to see that it does work, and that there are, you know, all of the benefits that we've just been talking about are quite tangible after you've started seeing these things a few times. So look out for it. And it would be great if you could keep in touch and just let us know how you're getting on, if you manage to bring any of this into your own context.
I had to leave. I couldn't finish the actual accreditation, but I just did the, you know,
well, you know, any of that experience, or any, you know, even just anything that we've proposed today, if you can find a way to work that in, or, you know, it would just be fantastic just to see what happens, you know. And as you know, as we've hopefully shown, it's very low prep. It's just, you know, grab a text, something that's been, you know, something that comes up in the textbook, even, I don't know, if you don't have time to go and look for authentic resources, hopefully some of the resources that we've given you will give you a shortcut to that. But just to kind of allow, I don't know, even I know we're saying that the timing is pressured, but if there is a way of kind of fitting it in, just to experiment, see what your classes make of it, start asking them those questions, get them thinking about those kinds that kind of reasoning that will get them into thinking in the text that way. I think that's all of it is valuable, and all of it's going to contribute to them being more rounded linguists in that way.
Also opens up so much about, you know, intercultural understanding. I mean, there is so much. That's another thing that I was surprised is I'm a literary translator by training, and the insight that some of those kids were showing about, well, you wouldn't say this in this context, you know, that you didn't have to actually say too much. They came up with
exactly,
and, you know, and because it was such a diverse background, you know, it was quite interesting to say, well, I would never say that to my granddad, you know, because father figure and everything, and another kid would do that, you know, and all that was fascinating. I mean,
I think that's the great thing about it. It often feels like you're just sort of unlocking something that's already there when you give a group a text and just ask those questions, as Katrina says, and just sort of gently ease them into this kind of discussion about how the text works and how you would reimagine it in your own context. It really comes to life, and you find the pupils talking in a way that they don't otherwise, and kind of making connections that they wouldn't otherwise. It's a really wonderful thing to watch.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really quite, I don't know, flattered and pleased and honoured that we're about 9:30 and everyone's still chatting, because we just love talking about languages so much. It's great.
I mean, when I met up with Charlotte to set things up, we had quite a long chat, didn't we, before we actually get on with the technical, because it's our hobby, isn't it, as well as our job, and that's what it's lovely that we have the two to go together.
Well, that is what we often hear from teachers who've taken part in Stephen Spender Trust things, is that it puts them back in touch with the reason they became teachers, or the reason they studied languages and became teachers in the first place.
And that's the excitement that then they can give to their students, can't they, really? And that's where, I mean, you'll hear people, or dare I say, people complain about the exam boards, about exams or whatever, and you think, but really, we are in our room, we can actually do this. You know, of course we've got to do the exams as well, but there's nothing to stop you doing this, really, unless you've got somebody who really is absolutely on top of you. But you know, you've given us so many reasons to say, look, this is worthwhile putting some time into this, and to get the motivation and the interest. And
I think the younger the better. I don't know how many primary teachers there are or have been this evening, but I mean, most of the work that we're doing is with Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, because we're hoping to make a difference to uptake at GCSE, and so that's where we want to sort of put our energies. And I do think that the if you get them thinking in this way and get them kind of opening up to language and to text from a young age, then it sets them up for the rest of their language learning career.
Yeah, and it is something we can use for those of us, you know, closer to the GCSE as well. You know, the fact actually there is translation. I know there was debate about it and some people are unhappy about it, but this will be an excuse that someone gave. If there's anybody who's anti this, well, we have to do translation. The only problem is that you're not allowed to be creative.
I was going to say, don't let on that it's not that kind of translation, but it's all part. Thing is, I think what I'm thinking is that kind of translation that you get in the GCSE now, it's like that's translation, and what we've got is that, and the interesting stuff on top of it. So it's all bundled in there. We've still got to decode in the end. We've still got to actually, you know, extract the meaning out of it and recreate it. That doesn't change. It's just making it more purposeful.
It's one of those areas where the fun things will actually enhance the exam results. They're not incidental. They are the things that you need to know anyway.
And even and almost I tend to get the children on my side to say, look, I know this is ridiculous, I know that, but we have to put this in for the examiner. But how would you really say things? And it's just making it open with them. I think it's
definitely, that
pronoun is just so important. You've got to put the there in. If there's a why there, put in there. That sort of thing. Or
just do it.
Of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great, really lovely. Well, certainly if there are other things that you'd like to do, any other webinars or whatever, but this is going to be available obviously for people able to watch. But I think we probably just like to get together and doing a bit of translation, actually.
Oh, we should. We just make it a social event. That's great. I'd be up for that.
I love, the bit that you started with. I mean, and of course, any talk that Stephen Fawkes gives, he'll always bring in this love of language per se, and the playing with the language and all of those. I mean, idioms we love idioms, don't we? As soon as you started talking about it, people were saying, oh, my favorite is this one, my favorite is this one. And
and you learn so much about a culture as well by seeing how they're
just little windows, aren't they?
But I'm also intrigued when it is the exact same idiom and you think, well, who came up with it first?
Who's stolen it off who?
One of our undergraduates has looked at all the different, I think it's raining cats and dogs, maybe a really common English idiom, and found all different translations of it and looked at the similarities and differences, which is really interesting to see.
And do you know why it's raining cats and dogs? Because I was told why, but I don't know whether I believe it.
No, what were you told?
Well, I was told it's because, now I'm going to get the story wrong, something to do with when it really pelts with rain, dead dogs and cats who are on the roof come down.
In which culture was that?
I don't know which culture. That's why I only get half a story from me. So now your homework is to find out
where that comes from.
Something to do with that. I'm sure.
I found a lot of the haiku translations that I did, like the one I showed you at Language World, for those of you that were there, that has a kind of a similar effect actually, because they're very, very short. And then I found this one particular haiku which is very, very popular in Japan, it has, I mean, there are about 40 different translations that I could find, and I'm sure there were many more, and they were just fantastically different, all of them. They had these, some of them had decided to reimagine it in limerick form. Some of them had just decided to be purely onomatopoeic. Some of them had just only 3 words in them. Some of them had kept to the 575 pattern, and just to kind of go through why, constantly referring back to the Japanese and why that, how they'd arrived at all of those different possibilities, and none of them were more correct than the other. It was just fascinating to see what students come up with that. And all the time they've got this little piece of Japanese that they can say, oh, I know, I understand this now, and this is mine because I can read it. And at the beginning of the session, none of them could read that piece of Japanese, or any Japanese probably. But now they know what it sounds like. Now they know what it means. Now they know how to interpret it in many ways. And it's amazing. It's a little gift they can take home with them. And they like that.
Oh, and Becky, thank you. Becky is saying it was on Horrible Histories, perhaps. The Paw Through Cats and Dogs at the Bourgeoisie.
When it was raining.
When it was raining.
Becky, that's brilliant. Good old Horrible Histories. And Camille as well has put the thing about l'étranger. I say the thing about the duel because I actually did go to a translator's duel about this once, and they spent 3 hours discussing the translation of Aujourd'hui Maman est morte. And it was just hilarious because it spirals off into all sorts of different directions, but it is extremely passionate and just probably one of the most controversial translations ever done now, because there are always new translations of l'étranger coming out, aren't there? And they all decide to do something slightly different with this first line, and the critics seem to think that is what decides the success of the translation. So it's something that's it's nice to bring into the A-level classes because they have it as a set text, a lot of them as well. So that could be a really nice in with
the German Kafka's Metamorphosis. Similar. That opening sentence is controversial.
Yeah. Anna, I think I heard it was something about small animals keeping warm in thatched roofs, and when it rained they got washed off. Well, I think that's slightly less nasty than the others. I quite like that. I might choose to believe it's that one.
I must find out, because I'm not just making it up. I definitely heard that somewhere.
That's great.
Yeah. I think we've got lots of things to follow up here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Well, I've been recording all of this, so we have
whoever's on YouTube, if the lady from Australia is still there, well done. You made it to the end.
Oh dear. Yes, because I didn't read. We did have people from all over the place, didn't we?
Yeah, no, I was very, very excited about the internationalism of tonight.
Well, you should have been. Joe gave a talk. Was it just last week, Joe?
Yeah, last Wednesday.
It was just incredible, wasn't it? And the excitement, it was very interesting what Joe had to tell us, but it was also just the excitement at the beginning of people who were just in all these different time zones. And this was something that's allowed, isn't it, by this amazing technology?
Yeah, that is a big plus, definitely.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Right, and I did see Frank was somewhere, and he's gone. We've got Frank McInnes. There was another Frank here.
Yes.
Who'd grown a beard, and I hardly recognised him, and I was going to make a comment about it.
That's probably why he's gone.
Right. Knew I was going to catch up with, and Jenny as well. I was going to say hello to, but anyway. All right.
Right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
This
It
really
really
lovely.
has.
Danielle, you must your dinner must be overcooked.
Yeah.
No, I won't have that. I'm too busy talking about translation.
Do you know Danielle?
I don't know if I do.
Well, Danielle writes the most wonderful books, and always on the emphasis is on the authentic as well. So
I just followed you on Twitter, Danielle.
On a webinar. So
great.
Thank you, Danielle.
It sounds like we should talk, I think.
And there's Glenys as well. Hello, Glenys. You all right? Missing your students. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, again. And
thank you very
yeah,
much.
keep in touch. Send us an email. Let us know what you're doing with your translation and how it's working out. And if you need any resources, any tips, anything that we can do to bring it into your classrooms, then just get in touch. Really.
Absolutely.
Okay, then. Well,
Excellent.
I don't close the room. I don't make it so that you're shoved out. I shall wait for people to gradually go.
Yeah.
So.
Bye, everyone.
And thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Right.
much.
Thanks ever so much to you.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks so much for everything today.
Oh,
It was
wasn't it a
amazing.
lovely evening?
It was
That was
lovely.
great.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, you just, I mean, and I do think it works really well having two presenters like that as well.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah. Apart from my slightly
really-
dodgy slide moving. Sorry about that.
The whole thing, I just think it made it even more of a sort of nice feeling to it and relaxed.
Yeah.
And Stephen gave a talk once, and he just asked me to keep the video open if there was a problem. But actually, he was saying, I think I said to Charlotte, it's quite good to have someone give a reaction to what you're saying as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it kind of
like there's a bit of a
guides,
vacuum.
to the reaction, doesn't it?
That'll be my mum. So I will. Okay.
Take care, Helen. Thanks
Take
again.
care.
See you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Charlotte.
Bye-bye.
We'll give you a call soon.
Yeah.
We'll
it was
catch
a
up.
pleasure. Let's do it
Yeah,
again soon.
always. See you
Take
later.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.